Chris McDowell from Govis. I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping and then pass over to Simon Morris from TTC. So we're going to be recording this session, just so you know, and putting the recording on our YouTube channel afterwards. If you don't want to appear on camera, I recommend maybe sitting in either that corner or that corner, so you're not facing the screen, and then you won't be there. The event's going to go until 1:15 PM potentially, just to allow a bit more time for discussion, but we'll probably have the presentations themselves finished by 1 in case you've got other meetings to go to. Thanks to everybody who's joining us online today. And hopefully you can hear us well enough. Any waves or thumbs up? And yep, excellent. We're coming through well. That's always a bonus. To try and give everyone an even playing field for the Q&A, we're using a tool called Slido. There's some information about that on the screen right now. You can just go to slido.com and enter that code, or you can scan the QR code. It's not a scam, I promise. And that just enables you to put in your questions as you think of them, and we'll get to those at the end of each of the 2 presentations, I think, so 2 rounds of Q&A. And that's it. And yeah, thank you to Jacob from Govis and also from MB for hosting us today. And thanks as well to TTC for being our partner on these events and for providing the lunch. And so over to you, Simon, to introduce our speakers.
Thank you. I'm Simon Morris from TTC. As Chris mentioned, very engaging presentation that we've got coming up today, digital accessibility. From the Office of the Health and Disability Commissioner, we've got Dr. Esther Woodbury. Dr. Woodbury is a specialist in disability and human rights, and Esther holds governance roles in disability organisations and is currently Principal Advisor Disability at the Health and Disability Commissioner. Also with us today, we've got Dr. John Warren, who has extensive work history in the health sector in public, private, academic and regulatory roles. This includes 10 years working abroad and remote consulting for developing nations. John is Principal Advisor for Education at the Health and Disability Commissioner. John's role incorporates accountability reviews and testing the development cycle. Oh, sorry, that's bonds. My notes the wrong way around. Also today, we've got Bon Wilton Scott, Product Owner and Senior UX Advisor at Department of Conservation. Bon's the product owner for the Department of Conservation website and Discover the Outdoors interactive map, which I'm very interested in hearing a bit more about. Bon champions easy to use and accessible digital information and experiences to all users. And Bon's talking about incorporating accessibility reviews and testing into the development cycle of a large website front end as part of a technical modernisation project at the Department of Conservation. So thank you everybody for joining us today, and thank you for our presenters for making themselves available. And I'd like to hand over to Dr. Esther Woodbury to start our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, firstly, thank you for the invitation, and on behalf of me and John, it's fantastic to be here and to talk about our perspective on digital accessibility. We're both going to try and do a little bit of audio description for the PowerPoint slides we've got, and so our first slide is it's essentially the HDC branding with our names on it, and we've got a picture of what AI thinks is an appropriate picture for digital accessibility, which, if you can see it, is not very accessible at all. It's very confused. It's got some smiley faces. It's got some wheelchair users. It's got lots of gadgets in the background and doesn't really tell us a lot about digital accessibility. But I'm going to hand over to John to talk a little bit about our organisation and the context that we're working in.
Kia ora, thanks Esther. Well, I'll just start by saying this slide's got a picture of some resources that we recently developed on the left, which focus on your rights, and on the right it's got a picture of Mount Ruapehu, one of my favourite places, and it's a fence with a cliff sign. But just to start with, to talk about HDC, I'm not sure, I can't see anybody, how many people know of the Health and Disability Commissioner. unfortunately, most people tend to know about us when their rights have been broken, which is a little bit sad because that means that what we are meant to be doing, the promotional side of your rights and your protections within the health and disability space, is not being done. So when HDC was set up in 1994, it was set up as a result of a cervical cancer inquiry which found that doctors had been going a little rogue, if you like, and doing things to women without their informed consent. So it was recognised there needed to be a public organisation that gave some protection to the health and disability sectors. And that's where we are. The Act dictates that we promote and protect the rights of people in the health and disability space. So hence the picture on the right of the cliff, because everyone's heard the example of it's better to have the ambulance at the top of the cliff rather than the bottom. So this sign is a fence saying, look, there's a cliff. So our role, if you like, half of it is to promote our rights and the other half is to protect it so that if there is a cause for the rights being broken, there is a mechanism where that's investigated to see whether there is an issue with the complaint and try and remedy it in such a way that the system will be improved. Our stakeholders basically include the whole of New Zealand, if you think about it. We're all going to visit a doctor at some stage in our life or go to a hospital, and we may or may not have disabilities, but it's recognised about 25% of people do have that. So that's who we are. What we'll now go on to say is, where does that fit with digital accessibility?
So on the screen now, I've got just the headings of the Human Rights Act and the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, a copy of the Accessibility Guide leading the way in accessible information, and a screenshot of a woman wearing a black shirt doing the sign language to the wāta te aroha. So just to think about kind of what are people's rights with disability, with digital accessibility, kind of what guidance and what are you trying to achieve. So the legal requirements, so the combination of the Human Rights Act and the Bill of Rights Act essentially say that it's unlawful to discriminate on the grounds of disability in areas of public life, which of course includes all government services, and also in the provision of any public service. So essentially, you have the responsibility, or disabled people have the right to access information and services on an equal basis with others. A lot of the time we look to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which talks about that equal right to participate in society. Of course, there are sector standards when it comes to particularly government agencies. Agencies are set up to have signed up to the Accessibility Charter, and there's guidance around, you have to meet web, I don't even know, I'm not a technical expert, 3.0 or something like that in terms of web accessibility. But I suppose digital accessibility is quite a broad thing. It's obviously to do with web standards and other things, but yeah, kind of a bigger picture. Also, it's super important that you're meeting your purpose and your organisation. So whether that's communication and provision of services, for HDC, it's about disabled people can engage with our information and processes on an equal basis with others. And by focusing on accessibility, organisations can support inclusive experiences that help more people to engage with their digital offerings and their purpose, essentially. Digital accessibility itself refers to designing and developing digital content, website, apps, tools so that everyone, including disabled people, can access, understand and use information and services, which, making sure that people's information needs are met, and that might be providing text, text alternatives for images, screen reader compatibility, colour contrast, that kind of thing. Of course, there's a range of different impairments, and there's a range of different communication needs that people might have. So it might be that you have New Zealand Sign Language videos, it might be that you have like a compatibility with your website that people with like limited mobility can navigate around it and that kind of thing. But at its core, it's about designing clear, simple interfaces with straightforward instructions that people everyone can understand. I'm going to give that to you, John.
Okay, so moving on, what you see on the page now, if you like, is accessible information. So in the background is a screenshot of our website. On the left is a poster that we had, I think it was designed maybe 20 years ago, and on the right is the updated poster. Now this highlights a few things, but first of all, I just want to say that essentially accessibility has to be accessible for all. It's not just for people that have disabilities, because if we don't have it accessible for the general population, we've hit our main target for one thing, and it means there's not much chance for people with disabilities if our general population isn't covered. So that's probably the key thing, is what is inclusive accessibility for everyone? So that includes readability. So we now have a public sector standard which we're meant to uphold, which is plain language. And that's a reading age between 9 and 14 years. I'm not really sure why they say that, because surely that's around 11, you know. But anyway, between 9 and 14 is what they say. As Esther's already said, captions for videos, screen reader capability, accessibility formats. Now, I'm not sure how many of you know about accessibility formats, but they're formats for the deaf, so in other words, sign language, for low vision and blind formats, the easy read for people with cognitive and intellectual disabilities. So what we've done at HDC over the last 2 to 3 years is we've tried to make sure that all our key information is done in all those accessibility formats. The other thing to consider is, of course, the format that people are looking at it. So inclusive in that is smartphones. And the estimation is somewhere around 90% of New Zealanders have smartphones. If we look at the resources on the screen, you'll see the poster on the left. Interestingly, with any design that you do, you need to get consumer input. So who is your target market and is it working for them? So some of the feedback we had from some consumer groups is the red on the poster on the left looks like blood and is just confronting. Okay, and as you can see, the contrast is there, but the darkness doesn't actually make it that easy to read. The poster on the right is now in English, Te Reo Māori, and New Zealand Sign. So we're covering all of the main languages in New Zealand, and you'll see now we've incorporated QR codes down the bottom so that can link straight through to people that are spending a lot of time in a waiting room and need something else to read. Sure, that doesn't happen in New Zealand. You have a look at the website at the back, the web page. So that's our home screen. But you can see there's a lot of information. So there's a challenge in any organisation when you've got a lot of information. How do you make that work? And how do you make it so that people can find what they want? Talking about our resources, what we've done now also is we've updated it into 9 different languages, our main pocket cards that people have of our rights. So that covers languages where people are not likely to know English, their grandparents. So if you think of like the people that speak Arabic, Chinese, Hindi, which is a bit of a difference from our main core alternative languages, which is Samoan, Fijian, Cook Island Māori, that sort of thing. The other thing which I want to stress is the importance that anything you do, you test it with your target population. And just if we move on through here, you'll see the next slide coming up is this accessible information? Well, we'll have a look and go, so this is our webpage on your rights and what to do if you have any concerns. And our accessible formats, I'll see if this pointer works, is down the bottom, kind of works, down the bottom right, view and other formats. So if you need accessible formats, you firstly got to find the right page, then you got to actually find that tiny little thing down the bottom saying, here are the accessible formats. So as I say, this is a work in progress. So this is tricky for developing these technologies. If we look at the accessibility information, that's in the footer, and that's on the left here. You can see the footer of the website, which is tiny. I've blown it up so you can see it, and you can see about our site, the accessibility specifications. So again, we have challenges on how we incorporate this information and people can find it. I'll just move on and quickly show you. This is Te Tahu Haora, or the Health and Safety Commission, and on the right-hand side of this home screen page, you can see a functionality widget, which they're good. We used to have one which we had on our intranet. I'm not really quite sure why it was on our intranet and not on our internet, but as it wasn't used at all, it was taken down. If we were to get something like HQSC or Te Tahu Haora have, it would cost thousands of dollars. What does this offer? This is a blow-up of what that widget offers. So you can change the font, including the size, the text of it. And I might add, remember, there is accessible text, so make sure you know what accessible text is compared with unaccessible text. And you can change all those things that you can see on the screen: the text spacing, the cursor size, the contrast, the highlight elements, and focus. So those are things that are good tools, and unfortunately, they're not in our budget at the moment. But on to you, Esther.
Thank you. So some of the challenges with ensuring digital accessibility, and I've got a picture up of a hand cutting a piece of paper with budget with scissors. Of course, budget is really important, but budget is actually only one of the current challenges. So I've gone to the next bit of the slide where I've got different small pictures representing a number of different challenges that many people face when they're trying to improve their digital accessibility, which includes organisational commitment to accessibility. And if you have organisational commitment, then the planning and the timing of things, because of course everyone wants every bit of work done immediately, and to build accessibility in is not usually an immediate kind of process. Some parts of it, can be sped up, and you can have a whole system that works on digital accessibility. But if you have to create information in New Zealand Sign Language, that can take weeks and weeks to create. If you need to create easy read versions of key documents, that takes weeks to months to create. And so there are real challenges when, particularly when people are putting out information that's directed towards the disability communities, I should say. Disability communities kind of expect accessible information to be put out at the same time as information is released. So that there's a New Zealand Sign Language video explaining what an important report is about, sort of thing, so that the communities are not kind of waiting 2 months, behind everyone else to have the right kind of information to be able to kind of respond to a consultation or an important report about issues which affect them personally. There are challenges around design, kind of balancing organisational kind of design, branding, making sure that it's accessible. If you think back to the Code of Rights poster that John was talking about, not only was the contrast not super great, you also have words over patterns, I think it was like a fern frond, that kind of thing. That anything like that, any time when you're putting elements on top of each other, makes information very, very difficult for people with low vision, that kind of thing. I've got a little picture of a very, very old computer, and it's not just obviously about our computers, but about our digital systems, our databases, all of the kind of information kind of behind the scenes is sometimes not the most up to date and therefore very difficult to make very accessible. It sometimes poses real compatibility issues. Yeah, and obviously there's kind of the need for technical know-how in terms of like making websites accessible, that kind of stuff. So you've got diverse languages. And also digital communication is super important, but obviously it's also just one kind of communication and it's not kind of sufficient to be able to reach out to people. John talked about the very, very high rates of smartphone usage, but of course those that usage drops significantly amongst older people and also amongst some groups of disabled people who perhaps don't have the money for the technology or don't have the money for the most kind of like accessible phones. You know, like iPhones have a lot of digital accessibility built into them, but not everyone can afford to buy an iPhone. So therefore, you know, some of those kind of important technological features are missing with the sort of cheaper smartphones. There's lots of other issues in terms of, you know, the budget constraints, limited training, but there's also kind of like keeping pace with evolving technology. You know, we talked about the AI picture at the beginning. There's actually a real, AI can be really useful, but it can create a whole lot of extra barriers, like creating, you know, images that are actually not that accessible, not that helpful, that kind of thing. But obviously there's also lots of opportunities for AI to start learning about digital accessibility, recognising pictures, being able to auto-generate image captions and that kind of stuff. So there's lots of possibilities, but also, you know, a lot to navigate. And there's also, I suppose, issues around inconsistent approaches and monitoring across organisations, because obviously all organisations have kind of different comms setups, have different IT capacity and then expertise around making information accessible. So you need to kind of like have all of that stuff, and you need to have all those people working together, coming up with a plan, and then there needs to be like a budget for it. But I am going to talk about some of the solutions, because I'm not just a poo-pooer. One of the key things that is important is thinking about kind of the organisation as a whole, leading, particularly commitment to leading from the top, creating like a culture of accessibility, which is an organisational priority. It comes with a strategy. Somebody needs to actually be creating a strategy around this and a budget. And a strategy doesn't mean like we will do every single thing immediately to make everything 100% digitally accessible. Obviously that would be great, but you know, within the next 2 years, we will make sure that these, like, you know, all documents that we produce in the future have a built-in accessibility line, have a checklist to know what people are supposed to be ensuring in any documents or any kind of new functions that an organisation might be developing. It's really crucial to make a plan, because things don't happen by themselves, and also you can't do everything all at once. You need to kind of think about what resources you have, what you're trying to achieve, all that kind of stuff. It is super important when you're kind of you know, pushing a culture of accessibility throughout the organisation, that like everyone in every team understands about you know, what kind of timeframes need to be built in, what kind of, you know, functions, that kind of thing. And it's super important, as John said, to partner with the people that you're providing services to. HDC has an advisory group called Whakawaha, and you know, it's really important that we can touch base with them around the communications we're doing, making sure they're accessible, but also sometimes you just need to use experts in accessibility, and particularly work with disabled people's organisations who are really, really connected to their communities and know exactly what people need. And of course, across the whole public sector, we need to be thinking about more support and training sessions on the technicalities of digital accessibility. And now I'll hand back to John.
Cool, thanks Esther. Big topic and we're running out of time. I said to Esther, look, we have to include some research because I'm a bit of a geek like that. And so what you see on the slide is a digitally inaccessible image, but it has incorporated some good information. So these are quite good studies that have been done. One from 2023 to show that 96% of the top websites have accessibility issues. So of course that affects millions. There was a good piece of research done in 2021, which was good for HDC, in that it said it looked at websites for GPs in Scotland, and it found that only 23% were set at the right readability level, which I mentioned earlier was between 9 and 14. You'll also see on the website 96% have accessibility issues, but also 70% of developers need training. So, that kind of sits quite nicely with where we're sitting here, doesn't it? What else have I got here? The other thing which is kind of interesting is a lot has been done for people with visual impairments because they seem to be the easiest disability area, but that's at the detriment of all the other disability groups. So as we said, what we've done, we've got the accessibility formats, and when we put something in those formats, we make sure that that's for all those that information. So you can't just sort of cherry pick what you want. I'll just skip through the rest because I see we're running out of time, but let's go. I think we've got one last slide here, and this is really the take-home messages. So what you see is a person, an image of a person carrying a house. And the take-home messages are, providing accessible information is not just a technical requirement, but it's a legal and human right. Progress has been made, but we need to take up the challenge, particularly in the public sector. This is basically a call to action to make sure that we prioritise and advocate for accessible and digital inclusive practices for all people. The low-hanging fruit, of course, is making the language set at the right level. And finally, here's your final thought. Accessibility benefits everyone. By designing for disabled people, we create better digital spaces for all. Thank you, and we will take questions.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, I think we've got a couple of minutes to do questions. Yeah, and before we give Button his chance to speak. First question we've got coming. Do you know whether Gen AI might be able to do New Zealand Sign Language yet? Would that be helpful? I know it historically struggles with fingers and hands.
Well, the answer is no, I don't know. But in saying that, I did do an AI course last week, and the area is exploding. So it's kind of interesting. What we know today, next year is going to be completely different. So as part of the course, they had an avatar of the main presenter, and they're at pains to tell us when it was the actual presenter because they look the same. And when they generated this avatar, I mean, it's on a blank background, but basically it looked like the same guy. It was so good.
Next question I've got. Does the HDC have any internal policies on digital accessibility? We are tending to do this at Te Whata Ora.
So we've just been developing a disability strategic plan, and one of the actions on it is to develop an accessibility policy. Working around the accessibility charter and that kind of thing. Obviously there's been lots of different pieces of work, but I think that the point of doing it specifically like that is that it's a policy that the whole organisation can look to, and that it is linked. It's kind of signed off and it's linked to a specific budget within corporate services. Quite often, a lot of the accessible information has been kind of paid for through the disability services team, very small team. But it's actually an organisational issue. It's not like a disability team issue. So so that's in development, and that will be kind of for people to so staff to be able to consult. So if somebody kind of asks them for particular information or that kind of stuff, but the policy will also kind of, the intention is to not just kind of talk about different sort of format and accessibility formats of the website, but also just to think about how we're communicating with people in general, so that we're ensuring that when people receive letters from us, which they do constantly, that we're thinking about simple, clear, person-centred communication.
I'll just add to that. We have, as I said, put our key information into the accessibility formats. As part of that, we've also put that into our Māori so that it's accessible, and we look after our responsibilities with the Treaty of Waitangi. So when we've looked at what is key information related to the rights or complaints, we've said, okay, all that information goes into accessibility formats as well as translated into our Māori.
Cool. Thank you. I've got one question myself, actually. I know that any public-facing website is supposed to be compliant with web accessibility and usability standards. Is that something that HTC does governance around other agencies, their compliance with that, or is that?
No. So we just, essentially our work is around the quality of health services and the quality of disability services. So we don't have any oversight over accessibility. I know that obviously Whaikaha, which is the Ministry of Disabled People, they have some, kind of like, they have connections to different government agencies and that kind of stuff, but I don't know, they wouldn't be in a monitoring, they wouldn't sit in a monitoring space. So I actually understand DIA is, they kind of like hold a lot of the kind of web accessibility.
Digital standards.
Standards.
Cool. Okay. I think that last the question.
Just on that question, I see Jason Kiss from DIA is on the call. Jason, if you would like to jump in and talk a bit about what DIA do in that space, feel free.
Sure. Thanks. I just joined. So DIA, as home for the Government Chief Digital Officer, maintains the web standards. So that's the web accessibility standard and the web usability standard, like you've mentioned. We don't have an active monitoring program. Really, we provide support to practitioners as best we can, but we do have a piece of automated accessibility testing software, which we refer to as CWAC, CWAC. That's the Centralized Web Accessibility Checker. And this is a piece of software, open source software. It's available on GitHub. Anybody can download it and use it right now. But basically, it scans the websites that you submit to it, and it will run a number of tests, including the ACTS core tests. So ACTS is a open source library of rules that you can run against a web page and get a bunch of it will automatically find any errors. And ACTS is great because it has a low number or 0 false positives, which is really important in automated testing. You don't want to spend all your time following up on false positives. So ACTS helps reduce that. It runs a couple of other tests, but this has been really useful for the GCDO to gather insights at a system level about what kind of issues we're finding repeated across government websites, but it's also useful to the government agencies themselves to receive those reports that CWAC generates so that they can see what issues were identified on their websites, and they can start figuring out how they want to address those and how to fix those. We have our team of 2 is down to 1 person now. We're currently recruiting, so we're hoping to get the CWAC monitoring program up and running again in early 2025. That monitoring program will apply only to the mandated agencies. So those are the government organizations mandated by cabinet to meet the web standards. And that's not all of the public sector. It's actually a very small number of agencies. It's the public service departments, so that 30 some or so public service departments, and then Parliamentary Council Office, Defense Force, and the police. So those are the only government organizations that are required to meet the web standards. All other government agencies are recommended to do that. And of course, where accessibility is concerned, there's the underlying human rights legislation, the Human Rights Act. So ultimately, we all have an obligation, public and private sector, to deliver digital services that don't discriminate against disabled people. It's just within government, we have this additional set of standards that cabinet has mandated for a specific group. And it just applies to the web as well. So one last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop talking, is that we're now in the process of putting together plans for a digital accessibility standard. So this would replace the web accessibility standard, and a digital accessibility standard would apply not only to all digital information and services, not just websites. So think about native mobile apps, but also Office documents that we share via email, that sort of thing. It would not only apply to that, but it would also ideally extend the scope in terms of the agencies that it applies to. In a sense, ideally, we'd like all of the public sector to have to meet a digital accessibility standard. We'll see how far we can get with a new mandate, because we're going to go to cabinet for a new mandate, but it's uncertain yet how many agencies in the new regime will be subject to the standards.
When's that likely to come in, Jason, that digital accessibility standard?
Yeah, well, it's easily a couple of years away. So right now we're in the process of updating the existing web accessibility standard just to be current with Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 2.2, which is the international standard. But that's just an interim update to keep us sort of up to date until we get the digital accessibility standard out. But it'll be a couple of years because it's a major change. And it will involve extensive consultation, especially with disability groups as well as government agencies, in order to determine the kind of program of support that will be required when all of a sudden we start expecting full-on accessibility through all of the digital offerings that are provided across government.
And just one more.
Very well, Jason. Thanks very much for outlining all of that. And if you want, feel free to do a shout out for I think they're called the accessibility web clinic, the web accessibility clinics that you run sometimes. Potentially some people on this group will be interested in.
Thanks.
Along some of those, and we could put a link to that in the material we send out after the session.
That's great. Thank you.
And one more quick question before handing over the baton. Curious to know, is HTC covering people living with autism and ADHD?
So HTC has its act, and part of that is creating like a code of rights. And the code of rights applies to like everybody who ever accesses any health or disability services. So absolutely, because obviously autistic people access health and disability services, so they're all covered under the code of rights. And so we promote people's rights to help them kind of speak up if they're unhappy about a service or support that they've received, but we can also receive complaints and then assess those complaints as well. So yeah, everyone is covered.
Thank you. I'd like to hand over now to Wellington Scott from the Department of Conservation, who's doing his presentation on incorporating accessibility reviews and testing into the development lifecycle. Bond's the product owner for the Department of Conservation website. Thanks for your patience, Bond. I'll let you take it from here.
Hey, can everyone hear me all right?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, let me just share my screen. I have a bad habit of hitting the leave button because it's got so much visual hierarchy behind it. There we go. Let me just get my little spreadsheet. No, this isn't a spreadsheet. Sweet. So hopefully that's not sharing anything that it shouldn't. Everyone can see my little PowerPoint?
Yes.
Sweet. Yep, so I'm going to talk about integrating accessibility expertise into the development cycles, and this came about during the technical modernization project for the doc website, and we actually just released 2 weeks ago, and we're doing some wrap-up releases today that already happened in the morning. So if I hit the next button, is it going to work? No. How do I do this? There we go. Let's talk about some context. So we're talking about the doc website. That is www.doc.gov.nz. It's DOC's primary digital communication channel. It covers every aspect of what DOC does, from parks and recreation to information about native species, to consultations, to how to help nature, and a lot more. It's pretty much, if it's not on the DOC website, it doesn't exist in terms of what DOC does. Every year it gets around 11 million visits, and that's by 4.3 million visitors. I'm always a bit dubious sometimes with Google Analytics, but when I actually look at the daily usage rate, it does seem pretty accurate in this situation. And the majority of users are actually looking at parks and recreation information. We needed to replace the front end of the DOC website. Front end just means everything that you see a public user would see. It's not about the back end, it's not about the database, it's not about the content management system behind it. That front end was last upgraded 10 years ago. And in terms of code and how quickly some things go out of date, that thing was pretty much a donkey that's long since dead. It had multiple issues such as accessibility, responsiveness, loading speed, component duplication, and difficulty for developers working in it. To give a sense of scale, the DOC website has 24 unique page template types and 25 function blocks that aren't tied to page templates. And then these are used interchangeably by the web comms team here to create around 12,000 web pages. So let's have a quick overview of what worked and what we learned. At the very start of the project, and something that I inherited from previous product owners that tried to get this project across the line in 2018 and 2021, was that fundamentally any new code that we make must meet the NZ Government web standards. And then on top of that, let's also aim for no accessibility issues at all in regards to the code. To achieve that, I looked and I was like, well, best practice everywhere keeps stating, hey, make sure accessibility is part of it from the start. Make sure there's an expert able to review at the UI, at the code stage, and pretty much every single bit you can do. We used accessibility experts to quality control at the review step in combination with testers and my role as product owner to do product owner review. We found that during it, instead of having an accessibility expert necessarily have to kind of re-go into the environment and check that a simple bug was fixed, we found that actually just having a dev screen share and be able to talk one-on-one with the accessibility expert worked quite well. And then in terms of contract, we figured out a rough estimate of hours with our contract with Catalyst, based upon the number of page template types and functional blocks, and based upon what they quickly went through and had a bit of a play around on the website. This gave us a cost range overall, which was really important in justifying how much we'd need and make sure we can pay for it. And then in terms of actually paying for it, it was a pay-as-you-go approach. What we found an issue is that the DOC website, in terms of accessing its integration and UAT environments, it isn't something that you can just log into. In that regard, we use IP address whitelisting, and we found that if people didn't have a static IP, that thing was changing every day. It made it practically impossible to keep updating that because it would require a release in our situation to change those IP addresses around. And that's when we discovered that actually screen sharing with a dev worked out a bit better. I realized at the end was maybe it was a good idea to give the accessibility expert full access to the same tool that we're using for tracking dev work. We kind of went with a dual approach where the accessibility experts would log it in their tool, Redmine, and then I'd go in and look at them and then copy them out, and then put them into DevOps in our situation. That did made sure that I knew, hey, this is exactly what they've requested, and so I had full visibility of it. But I'm sure we could have figured out a process of having the accessibility expert have enough context of what not to go into or try and make, and just make sure that they were fully across the way that we're using tagging structures and that, which got quite complex. Here is probably what people may find the most helpful, is the accessibility integrated development workflow. So on the left here, as a component was developed, it gets peer reviewed by a developer. It then goes to integration environment for testing. They'll do the little testing, and then it goes to a tester to test the functions, the requirements, etc. has been met. It then would go to an accessibility review by an accessibility expert. And the reason why we did it at that point is there's no point an accessibility reviewer reviewing a function that doesn't work. So, you have to kind of get done to some point. You can't do it at the same exact time necessarily. And then after the accessibility review by the expert is done and there's no issues, then it would go to me as the product owner to review it and set the component to done. But if at any one of these points an issue occurs, well, it goes back to the dev, a bug is logged, and then basically the outcomes needed, noted, and then goes back to the developer, and then the developer goes through it again. This time, if it's an accessibility bug, it would go, yep, accessibility bug is fixed. Sweet. Dev is now going to screen share with the accessibility expert, rather than having to go through a longer process of them maybe not being able to access the UAT and integrate environments. It would then go to, once again, a function review by the tester. In theory, that test isn't needed, but it's still helpful just in case something did go wrong. And then, if the accessibility bug is fixed, instead of it going again to the accessibility review, it would go straight to the product owner. Yep. And then what I have not noted in this workflow is how we worked for the UI UX stage. It wasn't a waterfall process. Our UX designer and UI designer worked the entire time with the devs to make sure it was being implemented as they saw fit. At the same time, accessibility review was being done on those components. So there was a few times where the UI and UX designer would change something just to bring it in line. And a little bit of a note on that, it was a technical modernization project. There was no redesign as part of it. Besides slight minor changes. We just didn't have the money or time to do a proper successful redesign and from the ground up. And here is a quick screenshot of how the task looked in the backlog in DevOps. Ignore the use of a feature and backlog items for things that maybe are not meant to be used like that. I need to get around to looking at properly matching things around. So for this is places to go page. That's a page template type with the UI step. And then at the same time, the storybook would be created, which is our digital design system. And then you'd create the org. In this case, this one had a functional block as part of it. And that would be kind of almost like its own little process where it would go through the UI, go through the storybook, go through an accessibility test. In this situation, it couldn't because it relies upon the back end. But you test that, and then that would be approved. Go through that process as defined earlier. Then would integrate the entire page template into the doc website integration environment, and then we'll give it for accessibility review at that stage. And then, as you can see there, in this case, there was 5. We've got some missing area labels, some drop downs, missing area expanded stuff, some things not highlighting, more area, a lot of area missing stuff there. And then, it would go through that workflow as defined. I just saw a hand up. Do we want to hold questions till the end, or?
Yeah, sorry, Bob. Just a quick question. Some people online say they can't see the presentation. We can see it. We're in the room with the screen sharing. Is there anybody else who cannot see the presentation being shared right now?
Yeah, that's why I put my hand up.
Okay.
Thanks.
So I've shared in Teams. I don't know how.
I'm sorry, Amanda, it might just be you. I'm not sure what the...
Okay.
Yeah, because we're seeing it here. So, and a few other folk chipping in saying they can see it.
The slides will be shared after the presentation and with the recording as well, just in case you need to...
Thanks.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Here are some benefits of how this workflow helped. one of the key things that as a product owner on the doc website and the interactive map I am really keen on is that it's all of our users. The definition of done is inherently a product or a function or a button works. It doesn't work if a small percent of the users can't use it. It just inherently doesn't work at that point. For me, it's a very clear black and white thing. We don't make a car that can't go for all users, do we? No, a car needs to work for all users, and probably worst analogy I can use there. But yeah, that's really what drives that, and that's why fundamentally the benefit from this is that all of our users can use the doc website. Accessibility integrated into the development workflow really helped a lot, and that led to bugs being raised quickly, which meant really that devs still had the context on what they were building. It was not done at the end of the project like a big audit that would possibly not then get actioned at all. And I would think this really speeds up efficiency. There's nothing worse than losing context on what you were doing and having to come back to it months later. The devs were able to improve on the accessibility work as they went. I did notice that as the project continued with accessibility reviews, we saw less and less of accessibility bugs being raised. And that was really good to see. And a bit of a note on that, all vendors I find that it's not a knock on vendors. Vendors love to say that they're going to meet the NZ government web standards, but unless you've got someone to actually check and quality control that, sometimes things slip. And that's the same for any, like, let's say security, etc. You've always got to have a bit of quality control to really make sure someone's meeting the contract. Yeah, we also made sure that it wasn't just the accessibility requirements. We did also meet a lot of best practice. I saw them as, yep, let's do them as we're doing them. It's not going to take much longer to do it, and I think every single case. So there were quick wins, may as well do it now. Who knows, maybe they're going to come as a requirement later anyway. Yep. And yeah, I've already talked about quality control, and then over the entire project, we had 50 accessibility bugs and tasks found and fixed during the project. And that's out of a project item and backlog list of about 950 for wider context. And here's a comparison in terms of a quick lighthouse report that was done. We get these every month, and you can see there before we had results from 11th of October before the modernisation was released. 95 for performance, 91 for accessibility, 96 for best practices, and then 83 for search engine optimization. Post-release, the performance went up to 99, accessibility 100, best practices 100, and SEO 100. It is an automated system, so I'm sure if we went through an audit, there'd be issues somewhere. And a bit of a note that the technical modernization project, again, only changed the code. There might be content issues related to links, etc. Alt text missing on images and body text. So that was not part of the scope of the project. And then I made sure to keep that quick and short. Questions?
Yeah, I've got one, Bon.
Yep.
I've been involved in enough product and website development to know that often non-functionals are seen as bells and whistles and not your minimal viable product. How did you get the business to buy in to prioritise accessibility as part of this?
So in my case, it's easy because as a product owner, it's my call. Yeah. So it's my call. So I'm given that full support that I'm the expert. It's my product. Unlike maybe some other product owners that do not get where business can override them. In my case, I can't be for the most part. So I was really able to, and because this project existed in 2018, couldn't get the funding. Again in 2021, couldn't get the funding. It would make it a lot easier to be like, look, we've asked for this for the past 6 years. We need to meet this when we can point, and we were able to point to the legislation, the mandate from 2004, was it? The guidance from DAA, thank you, Jason, and just all those things that highlight, hey, we really need to meet it. And yeah, that really helped a lot. And then also, if we're going to do a full technical modernization of it, well, accessibility really pretty easy as long as you do it as part of it. So it's just one of those things that, hey, instead of getting an OIA, which I think has happened more and more over the past few years, is that OIAs are coming from disability groups. And that's really helped where we can point to that and justify, hey, we need to meet this. We are getting OIA'd and we are potentially breaching the Human Rights Act. And also the CWAC tool, that really highlighted, hey, there's a lot of issues with the DOC website. And because we were able to compare ourselves with other organizations, it really helps to justify the cost to management that, hey, let's do this. We look bad compared to them. This will come out as a public, and we would raise it as a, hey, this is now a public brand issue. It's, so we're able to achieve a lot of that stuff through the wider support happening in the sphere.
Cool. Another couple of questions come in. What are the challenges to make the existing websites accessibility compliant?
Do you mean in terms of the recode, or do you mean, if I can just get it?
I'm not clear if the person who raised this question might want to edit.
Hi, Bon. It was my
Yep.
question. I'm Shruti. I'm the test manager at Oranga Tamariki. So I was just wondering, we have these websites, but how easy would it be to make it compliant? Obviously, there would be code changes as well, but I'm more focused on the functionalities.
Okay, in terms of function, so I guess in this project was unique in that it was not unique, but because we said none of the old code is going to be existing, we are recoding it from scratch. It was kind of a,
Okay.
as inherently part of that. We didn't have any cost analysis to see how much more it would cost. It was just inherently, well, to recode the entire function, that means this is part of it. Just do it. So unfortunately, I don't have an idea of how much that cost because it was a whole damn thing that was redone.
Okay, thank you.
What is the ongoing approach to maintaining compliance for the DOC site so the site doesn't fall off compliance again or for long periods?
Yep. So that's something we're in the project wrap up stage, and that's something I really want to look into. It is my definition of done. So as I'm going through testing and that, but I don't have ongoing funding to have an accessibility expert do it. So I do rely upon my own expertise, which isn't as in depth as it should be. I'm an ex-content designer. In that regard, I can always test content, but it's in the stage of coding. That's where I'm a lot less experienced, and that's where the web accessibility clinics are probably going to be really helpful for me.
Cool. And final one that we've got here, what was the DOC website built on? Web language, CMS, etc.
Okay, so CMS, we use Optimizely. It used to be called Episerver. I think there's not very many organizations in New Zealand that use it. And then I'm not a technical person. The front end was mainly built on Tailwind. I'm not sure that's helpful, to be honest. But yeah, it's in this case, we have a lot of technical debt from the CMS, not from CMS, but from the back end and how it's been set up. That has caused a lot of knock-on issues for the front end when it would having to set up a lot of the connections just were not logical, and there's still a few little issues here and there because of that.
Cool.
Let me just see if I answer. That's in the Slido, right? Built on web language and CMS extra. If you want to know more, though, I can get a technical person to explain more upon that. If somebody sends me that email, I'll just put my email address into the. There we go.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, we've got any more questions? Online or through Slido? No. Well, thank you very much, Bob.
No.
Oh, sorry. Oh, one's come through.
Rose Compton has her hands up.
Kia ora. This might be a general question. My name's Rose. I used to be working at DOC with Bon and some of the others on the call, and now working at ACC. I had a general question. We've got lots of sites being developed externally by contracted vendors, etc. And I just wondered, this might be a question for DIA. What's the approach to, I guess, uplifting awareness or understanding of the standards with those developers rather than just on the agencies banging the drum as such? Is there work underway to, to nudge the vendor side who often do a lot of this development? Don't know if anybody's got a thought there.
Well, I mean, on the DIA marketplace, I think there's a category for web accessibility or similar. Yeah. So I guess there's a commercial incentive for suppliers or vendors to, measure up to the standard and then get themselves listed there.
And I know from my own experience as a test manager, going into various governments and departments and agencies, working with programme and project managers, I often say to them, if this is public facing, part of your contract should be that the vendor demonstrates compliance with web accessibility and usability standards. So you're not paying for us to test it. I mean, it should be like that coming basically out of the box from the vendor. They're the ones that should be demonstrating. So really it comes down to, I would say, is, well, it should be on the marketplace that any basically CMS or any public facing that's going to be used by a government agency is going to be compliant, but then also in the commercials with that vendor that you deliverable, that your solution is compliant with web accessibility and usability standards, so that the agency are not having to test to that it does what it says on the tin, basically, or should do what it says on the tin. Yeah.
And Jason's just shared that list of vendors who on the IOP marketplace who are web accessibility ones.
Yeah, I was going to say other web accessibility experts are available, such as TTC.
Yes, yes. And Catalyst as well, I think you were saying, Bon, have been your supplier for that particular piece of work. And we should just acknowledge as well, thanks to Brian from Catalyst, who nominated you as a speaker to talk about this topic.
Maya talking for ITP a couple of weeks ago. So, yeah, well, it's bang on, well, a wee bit overrun, yeah, but done quite well. Thank you very much, Bon. Thank you, John. Thank you, Esther. There's some really good takeaways there, I think, for everybody today, and very informative. And certainly learned a lot more about HDC other than the posters and the GP surgery that I'm kind of used to, but the only thing I know about the agency. And thank you, Bon, for taking us on the journey of your very successful transformation of the DOC website. So congratulations on that, and a really interesting story to hear. So, and again, thank you to everybody for hosting us today. So,
yeah, thanks very much. And yeah, for those of us in the room, feel free to stick around for a chat and to help look after the leftover food. Yeah, and thank you, Bon. Next time I go and book a tramping hut or something, I'll think of you.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.